Okay, you graduated from Wesleyan with a BA and MA in biochemistry. How did you decide to study screenwriting at USC?
I'd always had an interest in writing and in film, and I did a lot of theater actually while here at Wesleyan. And I worked in the pharmaceutical industry for a couple of years and decided that frankly I just wasn't very happy doing it. I wanted to be doing something else, and once you've worked your way up to a master's degree in biochemistry, it's sort of a, okay, well, what else am I going to do? And I said to myself, if I could be doing anything in the world, what would it be? And the answer was screenwriting. So I'm like, all right, well, let's apply to film schools then and see what happens. And I did and got into USC, and once that happened, it was sort of a, I can't pass this up. This is, too good an opportunity to let pass. So,
what were your experiences at USC like? And how did you decide on that particular?
I decided on that particular school because I got in. I applied to a bunch of different film schools. That was the one that I got in. The USC screenwriting program is one of the best in the country. And so, if you're going to get into one, that's a good one to pick. So that was how I picked USC. The experiences there were great. I met a lot of people, some wonderful people, some of whom are having some fairly successful careers right now. I learned a lot about writing. A lot about movies. I came out with my writing was much better when I came out than it was when I went in. And I learned a lot about how to survive in the business.
Interesting.
Which is really the best benefit of that kind of thing. The connections that you get out of film school
right.
Everyone says they're worthwhile. They're very worthwhile.
So what games have influenced you? And are they the same as your favorite games?
What games have influenced me, and are they the same as my favorite game? That's a really interesting question. The games that have influenced me most are, by and large, are frankly not electronic games. Dungeons and Dragons has been a huge influence, in part because, yes, I played Dungeons and Dragons. My parents played Dungeons and Dragons. I learned to play Dungeons and Dragons from my parents, so I've literally been playing it all my life. But it's a real easy way to start designing games. If you're a dungeon master, if you make a dungeon and fill it with monsters, you are designing a game. Maybe not a good game, and God knows when I was 8 I made many terrible dungeons. But that's where I first started learning it, and that's where I first started practicing it. I don't know, I assume that they're still happening around here, but every month or so there's the guys running around campus with the foam swords and the funny costumes. Yes, I will admit it, I was one of them back in the day. But that is also a game. It's a live-action role-playing game. And in writing that, what you're doing is you're designing a game for 40 or 50 people. Back before there was World of Warcraft, it was sort of like building World of Warcraft. And I was very active in that group. I did a lot of game design for that group, and that's where I really first started thinking about how to make good games. So I'd probably say, frankly, that those are the games that have influenced me most. There's a lot of other board games that I look at that I play constantly. I think there's a lot of really interesting mechanics to be learned from board games and from simple games. Honestly, the game War is a game I like to talk about a lot, 'cause it's a terrible game. But it's instructive to think about why it's a terrible game, and you can learn a lot from dissecting that.
Interesting. So what exactly is your work in these games? Do you write the scripts as well as programming them, or?
I do some writing. I don't do programming. Game design is it's a very misunderstood field. It's very different from programming. I'm not a programmer. I took one programming class here at Wesleyan. It was in a language called Scheme, which nobody used back then, and God knows nobody uses now. So while the language didn't actually help me, learning the logic was useful, but not because I do the programming, because I have to talk to programmers and interface with programmers. By and large, what I do is I tell the programmers what they should program. How is the game going to work? What are the rules? What's the interface? What's the feedback? How do you win? How much health do you have? How many resources do you have? All of those kinds of decisions. That's what game design really is. Programming and 3D art, when you say I make games, that's what most people think of. But that's not what I do. They're both useful skills if you have them, but that's not what I do. I figure out what you're going to play. What does the player do? That's the core question for any game designer.
This event is called Getting Serious About Gaming. It seems like a lot of what you do is educational. How did you come to be involved with educational game making?
I got involved through people at USC. Took a game design class while I was there. I met some people doing that, professors at USC. I made an impression on them. And it's their research, basically. They do research work on serious game design. There's a lot of interesting game work at USC. And that's kind of how I broke in, was through that. Broke in. And that's where the connections that I have are. And it's a really interesting field because you get to do so many different things. Right now I'm learning how a hospital runs during a disaster. I've learned immunology, I've learned congressional redistricting. I did a game for the National Counterterrorism Center where I learned some things that made it hard to sleep at night. So, all of that kind of stuff, that's what makes it interesting, and that's what keeps it fun, is you never know what game you're going to be designing next. And, that all came through the people that I met at USC.
We've been talking about serious games as a potential for education, but also, what do you think is the possibility of games as serious art?
Extremely high. Incredibly high. I think that games are absolutely art. A young art form, a difficult art form, and as with so many art forms, especially as those in the film community know, the intersection of commerce and art becomes some fairly deadly quicksand. But I think that there's Steven Spielberg a few years ago very famously said that games can't make you cry. I have two answers to that. The first is that anyone who says that has obviously never beaten my 4-year-old cousin at Chutes and Ladders. But the second answer, the more serious one, is they haven't done it yet. And I think we're definitely moving in that direction. A lot of game designers think about creating emotion through game. Because a game is an immersive experience. You're not watching the hero, you are the hero. And if a game is played right, you should be feeling what the hero would be feeling. You are the star of this story. Horror games, they sort of have it easy. It's easy to get you frightened. But I think that we're developing towards the rest of that. And I think that, we will have games that make you cry. We will have games that make statements. We do have games that make statements. A lot of them are in serious games or, more fringe stuff. You certainly won't see them on your Xbox. At least not many of them. But I also have to say, I played Halo 3, and, it's the third game in a trilogy, and when one of the characters who's been there since the first one dies, I teared up a little bit. It was this is somebody I've known for 8 years, more or less.
Spoiler alert.
I'm not saying who. Not saying who. But I think games are absolutely an art form, and I think they're just going to get better at it as we go forward.
How do you think that video games over, let's say, the last 25 or maybe 30 years have influenced our culture and other forms of art?
Well, they've had a huge influence on the movies, because both on the art and the business of it. The number of movies based on video games coming out has been huge, and few of them have yet to be very good, but they're still driving that business. People get very excited for them. You hear a lot of talk about the video game aesthetic influencing the movies, especially a lot of very CG-driven movies. You see these big summer action pics, and the critics are all coming out saying it looks like a video game. And I don't always quite know what they mean by that, because it doesn't look like a video game to me, but it has to do with that aesthetic of, the very shaky camera, the thousands of bullets flying everywhere kind of thing. I think they've had a big influence on entertainment, and I think they're having a growing influence on education and on social consciousness. That's certainly the focus of what I do, and I think that's something that we're going to see continuing to grow over the next, couple of years.